last week's episode, we learned about the weakened Han Empire, and about Sheng Jiao's failed Yellow Turban Rebellion. In the years that followed, the Han Dynasty would sigh its final labored breaths, and in 189 AD, one of the cruelest men in Chinese history would seize power for himself. This will be one of the men we're talking about today. My name is Tyler, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the second episode of my new series, The History of the Three Kingdoms. On May 13th of the year 189 AD, Emperor Ling died, and within the same year the final power struggle between the imperial family and the court eunuchs would break out. A court eunuch by the name of Jian began to plot the assassination of Jin, a relative of the imperial family, who at the time was also general-in-chief of the Han military, and replace Emperor Ling's eldest son and heir Liu Bian with his younger brother Liu Xia. The plan was unsuccessful, and Liu Bian took the throne under the name Emperor Shao. Jin and a man named Yuan Shao decided to be best for the empire if they were to assassinate the Shi Tongxi, who were the 10 most influential eunuchs led by a man named Zheng Eng, who controlled most of the imperial court. To fulfill this plan, Jin called for Dong Zhuo, a general in the Liang province, and Ding Yuan, an inspector from the Bing province, to send troops to the capital to help cement his position of power. Unfortunately for Jin, the eunuchs figured out what he was attempting to do and had him assassinated before Dong Zhuo's men could arrive. Upon hearing this news, Yuan Shao became enraged, and when he arrived in Liaoyang, he stormed the palace, killing the Shi Tongxi and over 2,000 eunuch supporters. This event would end the conflict between the eunuchs and the imperial family. However, only a few days after the assassination of Jin, Dong Zhuo would watch as Liaoyang burn. He sent in his men to quell the disorder, and while dealing with the chaos, began to covet Ding Yuan's army as well. He attempted to bribe Ding Yuan's right-hand man and registrar, Lu Bu, into killing him and serving Dong Zhuo instead. Lu Bu agreed, and upon killing Ding Yuan, cut off his head and presented it to Dong Zhuo. Dong Zhuo now had an even mightier army to be able to seize the power of the government. The emperor lost all remaining military and political power he once had, and within 4 days was replaced by his younger brother Liu Xia. This event would spark many rebellions throughout all of China. One such rebellion turned into a mighty coalition with many great members, such as Yuan Shao, Sun Jian, and Cao Cao. This alliance against Dong Zhuo can be said to have been formed within greed, since Yuan Shao began to plot against Dong Zhuo when he felt he wasn't given significant power, and fled the capital when he openly disagreed with Dong Zhuo's plan to replace Emperor Shao. At the same time, another grand administrator by the name of Cao Mao began to forge letters denouncing Dong Zhuo as a traitor who was attempting to usurp the throne. Cao Mao called for military intervention against Dong Zhuo, and these letters would make their way all across the nation. Many regional officials and warlords from all across China would receive these letters and respond to the call to eliminate Dong Zhuo. This group would be called the Guangdong Linshen, which translates out to the Coalition East of the Pass, named for its formation during several meetings east of the Honghu Pass, and Yuan Shao would be appointed to be the leader. The coalition quickly set up several camps along the eastern borders of Liaoyang. For all intents and purposes, they had Liaoyang completely surrounded. This blockade from the east was effective at cutting off supplies that were on their way to the capital, which reduced the government's tax revenue drastically. In response to this, Dong Zhuo would melt down all statues and treasures he could find for the bronze to produce more coinage, which then flooded the market and would cause massive inflation throughout the empire. In my opinion, the best thing about this was that the coalition was seen as a real threat, even though most of its armies were made up of opportunists who wanted nothing more than money and power, and they were being led by a man who spent most of the 180s in mourning for the deaths of his mother and adoptive father, while Dong Zhuo's men were battle-hardened warriors who had fought in many wars and many rebellions. Dong Zhuo became increasingly alarmed by the quick formation of the Guangdong Linshen and its foothold on the eastern border of Liaoyang. He decided that the capital would be evacuated immediately and the imperial court be moved to the city of Chang'an further west. All civilians would be moved to Chang'an as well, leaving Dong Zhuo and his military behind to quote-unquote defend Liaoyang from the coalition forces. Dong Zhuo's plan didn't go over so well with the officials in the court and was criticized by many. However, they were killed for their disobedience. In April of the year 190 AD, Dong Zhuo's planned migration began. He sent his troops to loot and rob the rich and drive the citizens towards Chang'an, while the emperor, nobles, and political officials were also driven from the capital. Anyone who was left behind was immediately killed on the spot, and after the evacuation, Dong Zhuo had Liaoyang burned to the ground, leaving nothing behind for their enemies. Cao Cao had caught word of the migration and attempted to lead his men west to attack Dong Zhuo's army, but he was defeated. Cao Cao was injured in the battle but was able to make his escape and flee back to camp. When he arrived back at the camp, he suggested that the coalition pursue Dong Zhuo's armies as they retreated, to show the coalition was still moving. However, the other generals at the camp dismissed his idea. Cao Cao was then told to go join his forces along with Yuan Shao, and after Cao Cao's departure from the camp, the coalition forces stationed there ran out of supplies and left. During this time, a warlord in the coalition named Liu Dai would kill Cao Mao to settle a grudge. this wouldn't be the last time that a member of the coalition killed one of his allies. At the same time, Dong Zhuo sent 5 of his most reputable men to meet with Yuan Shao and negotiate a peace treaty. However, Yuan Shao had all the men arrested and executed except for one. Dong Zhuo then realized that peace was not going to be an option and had his forces surround the coalition general Wang Quang's encampment. Dong Zhuo beat Quang's army so severely that he left the coalition and fled back to his home. This showed the might behind Dong Zhuo's forces, but even he knew that his power was beginning to weaken and the walls of his empire were beginning to crumble around him. In the southern district of Luoyang, Sun Jian joined forces with Yuan Shu, with about 25 to 30,000 men. There he was awarded the title General Who Quells Rebels, and was also made governor of Yu Province. Around the winter of 190 AD, Dong Zhuo sent a force of little over 10,000 to attack Luoyang. During this event, Sun Jian's men were partying and drinking. When word had reached Sun Jian about the men marching against him, he didn't even react. Instead, he continued to drink while his men got into formation on their own. Upon seeing how disciplined Sun Jian's forces were, Dong Zhuo's men promptly retreated. In March of the year 191 AD, Sun Jian would attempt to move his camp north, but was outnumbered by Dong Zhuo's generals and was quickly encircled. With a couple dozen men, Sun Jian was able to break through the enemy lines. Sun Jian, who was easily distinguishable by his red scarf, knew this beforehand and handed his scarf to his most trusted general, Zhu Mao. Dong Zhuo's men fell for the ruse and chased Zhu Mao while Sun Jian was able to make his escape. Zhu Mao would later hang the red scarf on a scorched pillar and hide in the grass. When the troops surrounded the pillar and began to move in on it, they realized they were subjected to a ruse within a ruse and retreated. Sun Jian gathered what men he could and moved his camp closer to Liaoyang. Dong Zhuo would not make the same mistake twice and let Sun Jian get away, so he sent 3 of his most competent generals, Hua Sheng, Hu Zhen, and Lu Bu, along with about 5,000 men to attack Sun Jian. However luck would have it, Lu Bu, who was the cavalry commander at the time, got into an argument with He Zhen on the battlefield. Sun Jian would use this commotion to attack and defeat them, and was even able to capture Hua Sheng, who was promptly executed. After this decisive victory, Yuan Shu, who was in charge of getting supplies delivered to Sun Jian, was warned that if Sun Jian was the man to kill Dong Zhuo and liberate Liaoyang, he would no longer be controllable. Yuan Shu gave in to his fear and stopped sending supplies immediately. Sun Jian rode over 30 miles in one night from his camp to the main coalition camp to see Yuan Shu. It was said that Sun Jian could be heard shouting, "I put myself in danger," during battle, with a primary purpose to eliminate a traitor for the country and a second to avenge the death of your kinsman. I have no personal grudge against Dong Zhuo, yet you believe slanderous talks and suspect me. Yuan Shu felt such a strong sense of shame that he immediately ordered for massive food supplies to be delivered to Sun Jian's camp. Dong Zhuo began to fear Sun Jian and the power he held over the battlefield. At this time, Sun Jian had overcome more odds than John Cena. So he sent one of his advisors in an attempt to seek an audience and an alliance with Sun Jian. Sun Jian, who, if you haven't already been able to figure out, was a man known for his grandiose speeches, and told him, "Dong Zhuo opposes heaven and defies the law. Until I have killed you and all of your clan and shown your heads to the 4 seas, I shall not be able to die in peace. How could I possibly ally with you?" Sun Jian marched his forces into Dagu Pass, which was a fortified area that guarded Liaoyang less than 26 miles away. Dong Zhuo would have to personally fight in this battle in the later Han tombs, but was defeated, and when he was defeated he fled Liaoyang back to Chang'an, while he left Lu Bu in charge of Liaoyang's defenses. Sun Jian met Lu Bu on the battlefield, but once again quickly defeated him and forced him to retreat. Sun Jian had conquered the former capital of China, and while Sun Jian was holding the capital, he ordered his men to reseal all the imperial tombs, so that the dead may finally rest in peace. According to Wei Zhao's Book of Wu, Sun Jian would find the imperial seal in a well, and keep it for himself, believing it was his destiny to rule over the empire. After the repairs were finished to the imperial tombs, Sun Jian and his men left Liaoyang, because it was too open for a counterattack. The city that both sides fought so strongly to acquire was now completely abandoned. Though this was a huge victory for the coalition, ultimately nothing would come of it. The leaders of the coalition at this time were busy fighting with one another about what to do next. Half of them didn't even know that the emperor was still alive, thinking he was killed during the migration from Liaoyang to Chang'an. Yuan Shao attempted to install a new emperor, a man by the name of Liu Yu, who was of noble blood. However, Liu Yu declined the invitation, saying he was still loyal to the current emperor, and if they were to try to install him again, he would move north just to avoid them. This bickering amongst the leaders removed the focus from Dong Zhuo and placed it on their own personal goals, and showed that even if their cause may have been just, they were all in this for selfish reasons. A man by the name of Han Fu, who was in charge of provisions to the coalition, stopped supplying them. This forced Yuan Shao to consider his own lack of supplies, and with the help of another leader of the coalition, they invaded Han Fu's land, and Yuan Shu was able to absorb the province of Ji for himself. It became clear to most that Yuan Shao was kind of a dick, for he sent one of his best generals to kill Sun Jian as he was on his way back from Liaoyang to meet with his commander. Zhao Yu was the name of the general, and he led a surprise attack against Sun Jian's camp and captured it. Yuan Shu sent reinforcements to aid Sun Jian, and they were able to pull out a victory. With this battle, it was clear that the coalition was a failure and had collapsed under the weight of its own greed. Now that the coalition had failed, Dong Zhuo no longer had any worries. He went back to being the biggest bastard in China. He no longer would allow anyone to speak their mind, and if he felt that anything was said about him was just a fraction bit offensive, he would have them killed on the spot. Several court officials began to plot his assassination, including a man named Wang Yun. Wang Yun was able to persuade Lu Bu into helping him, due in part to Lu Bu's strained relationship with his foster father, after Dong Zhuo threw a hand axe at him when he caught him having sex with one of Dong Zhuo's chambermaids. Around May of the year 192 AD, Dong Zhuo was on his way to a meeting in his chariot, when one of his commanders ran towards him and stabbed him. Dong Zhuo called for Lu Bu to help him, but instead of helping, Lu Bu killed him. After this, Dong Zhuo's relatives were all rounded up and executed, while his body was left to rot in the sun. An officer was left to guard the body after a wick was placed in Dong Zhuo's navel and lit. It was said that the body burnt for several days on all the fat. After Dong Zhuo's death, several skirmishes broke out between Dong Zhuo loyalists and Lu Bu's forces, leaving Lu Bu to be the victor. However, the loyalists were able to outsmart the brash and hot-headed Lu Bu and took control of Chang'an, killing Wang Yun. The loss of Dong Zhuo led to the loss of central power, leaving many different hands to attempt to grab for the throne. The year is 192 AD, and with all that has happened, we are still 28 years away from the era of the Three Kingdoms. What would have happened differently if Lu Bu had stayed loyal to Dong Zhuo? What was Lu Bu's true goals? Who is Lu Bu, and why did so many people fear him and so many people want to persuade him into fighting for them? This is the tale that we'll have to wait until next time.